Millionaire mocks simple lady at auction. But when he finds out who she is, he falls apart. Richard Coleman was used to getting everything he wanted with his money and influence. At 52, the real estate tycoon dominated New York City's most exclusive art auctions, as if they were his own home. That Thursday evening, he pointed a finger at a lady in her 70s, sitting quietly in the back of the room, and let out a laugh that echoed through the luxurious space. "Well, look who showed up," he said loudly enough for half the room to hear. "I think you got the wrong address, ma'am. The thrift store on Broadway Avenue is on the other side of town." The gray-haired woman in simple clothes didn't react to the laughter spreading among the guests. Her eyes remained fixed on a specific painting displayed on the auction's main wall. A medium-sized piece depicting a pastoral landscape of a flowered field at dusk. "Ma'am, are you sure you're in the right place?" Richard continued, now standing up to draw even more attention. "Each piece here costs more than an apartment." The woman finally turned her face toward him. Her calm, clear eyes met his for a moment that seemed to last an eternity. She didn't say a word, only clutching an embroidered handkerchief between her hands. Dr. Harold Mitchell, the auctioneer in charge of the event, cleared his throat to regain control. "Well, ladies and gentlemen, let's proceed with the auction. The next lot is the piece you see in the center." "Hold on, Doctor," Richard interrupted. "Before that, I'd like to know how this woman even got in here. This event is by invitation only." Dr. Harold discreetly checked his clipboard, and his expression shifted slightly. "Her name is properly registered on our list, Mr. Coleman." "Impossible. What money does she have to buy anything here?" The woman slowly rose from her chair. Every movement carried a quiet dignity that contrasted with the crudeness around her. She walked toward the center of the room, where the painting she had been studying was displayed. "How much is that piece?" she asked softly, yet with an undeniable authority. Richard burst into laughter again. "Ma'am, that painting is valued at $300,000. You got that kind of money in that little purse of yours?" She didn't respond to the taunt. Instead, she raised a small numbered paddle she had taken from her bag. "I'll give $350,000. The silence that followed was as heavy as an approaching storm. All side conversations stopped. Waiters paused mid-service. Even the sound of high heels on the marble floor seemed to fade. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. Richard felt as if the ground had shifted beneath him. He glanced around for hidden cameras, convinced this had to be some kind of TV prank. "This is a joke, right?" he muttered, but his voice had lost all its earlier confidence. Dr. Harold cleared his throat and regained his professional composure. "We have an offer of $350,000 from..." He checked his list again. "From Mrs. Hope Williams." "I'll give 400, Richard said quickly, as if needing to prove something, to himself and everyone else. Hope turned to face him for the second time that night. This time a small smile played at the corner of her lips. 450,000. Her voice was firmer now. No hesitation, no fear. It was as if she knew exactly what she was doing from the moment she entered that hall. Richard began to sweat. That particular painting wasn't even the most valuable in the auction, but now it had become a personal matter. He couldn't allow a woman who looked so plain to outdo him publicly. 500,000, he declared, his voice already showing signs of nervousness. 550,000, Hope replied without hesitation. The murmur spreading through the hall was different from the earlier laughter. People were intrigued, confused. Who was this woman who seemed to have unlimited resources hidden beneath such modest clothes? Melissa Coleman, Richard's daughter, touched her father's arm with concern. "Dad, are you sure you want to keep going? This is already getting too high for that piece." But Richard was blinded by anger and wounded pride. The humiliation he had tried to impose on the woman had backfired on him devastatingly. 600,000, he shouted, raising his bidding paddle with exaggerated force. Hope closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, there were tears she discreetly tried to wipe away with her embroidered handkerchief. $700,000, she said, her voice trembling. Dr. Harold was visibly uncomfortable with the situation. He had known Richard for years and was aware of the businessman's tendency to go overboard at auctions. But this bidding war was far beyond any normal standard. "Mr. Coleman, the lady has offered $700,000. Do you wish to—" "$1 million," Richard exploded, completely losing his composure. $1 million for that painting. The hall fell into absolute silence. Even the sound of the rain that had started outside seemed to have stopped. Hope looked at the painting for a long moment, then lowered her paddle. "You may have it," she said simply. Richard should have felt victorious, but something in her expression left him deeply unsettled. It wasn't defeat. It was something far more disturbing. Pity. Dr. Harold struck the gavel. "Sold to Mr. Richard Coleman for $1 million. But instead of applause, what followed was an awkward silence. Hope slowly made her way toward the exit, but before reaching the door she turned one last time. "Mr. Coleman," she said, her voice carrying profound sadness, "you've just bought the last painting my father made before he left this world." Her words struck the hall like lightning. Richard felt his blood run cold. Your father?" "Andrew Williams. He painted this in 1987, just months before he passed. It was one of 3 paintings left after our family lost everything." Melissa covered her mouth in horror. She knew the story of Andrew Williams. Every art student in the United States did. He had been one of the most important painters of the 20th century, but died in absolute poverty after his family was forced to sell all his works to survive. "Hope Williams," Melissa whispered. "Andrew Williams' daughter." "That's right, my dear," Hope confirmed, with a melancholic smile. "It's me." Richard was paralyzed. The woman he had publicly humiliated was the daughter of one of the greatest artists the country had ever produced, and he had just paid $1 million for a painting that was likely worth far more, not just in monetary terms, but in immeasurable sentimental value. But why didn't you say who you were?" Richard stammered. "Did you give me any chance to speak?" Hope replied gently, but her words cut like a sharp blade. Dr. Harold approached respectfully. "Miss Williams, I had no idea you were— Forgive my oversight." "Don't worry, Doctor. You've always been very kind to me the few times we've met. I only came today because I heard this painting would be here." "How did it end up at auction?" asked Melissa, genuinely interested and visibly embarrassed by her father's behavior. Hope took a deep breath. "It's a long story, dear. A story of how families can destroy themselves over greed and how art can become objects of dispute instead of bridges to beauty." Richard finally found his voice again. "Mrs. Williams, I didn't know. I apologize for my behavior." "Your apology is accepted, Mr. Coleman. But now I must ask you, what do you intend to do with the painting?" The question caught Richard off guard. He had bought the piece on impulse to prove a point, to humiliate this woman. Now he realized he possessed something of immense sentimental value to the very person he had tried to ridicule. I don't know. Why do you want to know?" "Because that painting depicts the backyard of our old home. My father painted it while looking out his bedroom window, just days before he passed. It was the last time he could hold a brush for more than a few minutes." The tears Hope had tried to hold back now streamed freely down her face. "He said he wanted to preserve the place where we were happy before we had to sell it to pay for his medical treatment." Melissa stepped closer to Hope and, without asking, embraced her. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Williams. I'm so sorry for everything." Richard watched the scene, feeling smaller than he ever had in his life. His wealth, his power, his arrogance, all of it had become meaningless in the face of this woman's dignity, the very woman he had tried to humiliate. "Mrs. Williams," he finally said, "the painting is yours. I won't charge you a thing." Hope gently pulled away from Melissa's embrace and looked at Richard in surprise. "I can't accept that, Mr. Coleman. You paid a fair price for it." "No," Richard insisted. "It wasn't fair. Nothing about tonight has been fair." "You don't understand," Hope continued. "I didn't come here to reclaim the painting. I came to say goodbye to it." "Say goodbye?" "Yes. I knew I'd never have enough money to buy it. I just wanted to see it one last time before it disappeared forever into some private collection." Richard felt as if someone had punched him in the gut. But the bids you made, where did that money come from? Hope smiled sadly. There was no money, Mr. Coleman. I was bluffing. Bluffing? Yes. When I saw you mocking me, I decided that for once in my life, I'd return the humiliation. I knew I couldn't even afford the first bid, but I wanted to see how far your arrogance would take you. The entire room listened in absolute silence. Hope's revelation had turned Richard from the aggressor into the victim of his own arrogance. You paid $1 million because you couldn't stand the idea that a poor woman might have something you wanted, Hope continued. But ironically, that poor woman never wanted to take anything from you. She just wanted the right to exist in the same space as you without being ridiculed. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. Melissa was openly crying. As Richard's daughter, she knew her father's arrogance well, but she had never seen it backfire so devastatingly against him. Mrs. Williams, Melissa said between sobs, please, accept the painting as an apology from our family. My dear, you don't understand. I don't have anywhere to put such a valuable painting. I live in a small studio apartment in Queens. A piece like this needs special care, controlled temperature, security. I can't provide any of that. Richard finally understood the depth of the situation. Hope wasn't rejecting the painting out of pride. She was rejecting it because she knew she couldn't preserve it properly. What if, Richard began hesitantly, what if the piece were displayed in a public museum, with a plaque explaining it belongs to you but on loan? Hope looked at him with genuine interest for the first time that evening. You would do that? It's the least I could do to try to make up for the harm I caused today. Dr. Harold, who had remained silent throughout the conversation, stepped forward. Forgive me for interrupting, but I might suggest the Museum of Contemporary Art. They have a section dedicated specifically to Andrew Williams. The piece would be an excellent company. Hope thought for a long moment. Her trembling hands clutched and released her embroidered handkerchief repeatedly. There's one condition, she finally said. What? Asked Richard. I'd like there to be a plaque explaining not just that the piece belongs to me, but also telling the story of how it came to the museum, the full story including what happened here today. Richard paled. You want me to be publicly humiliated forever? No, Mr. Richard. I want people to learn that art isn't about power or money. It's about memory, love, and humanity. Your humiliation today could become many people's education tomorrow. The depth of Hope's words left everyone in the room in silent contemplation. She had turned her own humiliation into a lesson for all of society. Melissa wiped away her tears and turned to her father. Dad, please accept Mrs. Hope's proposal. Richard looked around the room. Every eye was fixed on him, waiting for his answer. For the first time in his life, he felt the weight of a decision that went far beyond money or social status. I accept, he finally said, but with one condition of my own. What? Asked Hope. I'd like to personally cover the costs of conservation and security for the piece while it's on display, forever. Hope studied Richard's face for a few seconds. She was trying to understand if the offer came from genuine remorse or just another attempt to buy forgiveness with money. Why would you do that? She asked. Because, Richard paused, struggling to find the right words, because I've spent my whole life accumulating things without ever thinking about what they really mean. Today, you showed me that I'm a rich man who never learned the value of anything. And you think paying for the piece's conservation will change that? No, Richard admitted honestly. But maybe it's a first step toward learning. Hope walked slowly to where Richard stood and extended her hand to him. Then we have an agreement, Mr. Richard. When he shook her hand, something strange happened. For a moment, Richard felt as if he were touching the hands of Andrew Williams himself, as if decades of history and art were passing between them through that simple contact. Mrs. Hope, he said, his voice thick with emotion, could you tell me more about your father, about what he was like as a person, not just as an artist? Hope's face brightened for the first time that night. He was a lot like you, Mr. Richard. How so? He was arrogant and stubborn when he was young. He thought his talent was superior to everyone else's. It took him years to learn that true art comes from humility, not arrogance. A shiver ran down Richard's spine. And how did he learn that? Through suffering, Hope answered simply. When our family lost everything, when he got sick, when he had to accept help from people he once looked down on, that's when he created his most beautiful works. The painting I bought was made during the hardest time of his life, but also when he was most connected to his humanity. Melissa stepped closer again. Mrs. Williams, do you still have other works by your father? 2, she replied. A small still life and a self-portrait he made just days before he passed. And where are they? On the wall of my studio apartment. They're the only valuable things I own. Richard and Melissa exchanged glances. Both were thinking the same thing, but neither knew how to bring it up without sounding condescending. Mrs. Williams, Melissa said carefully, those works should also be in museums. They're part of the country's cultural heritage. I know, dear, but I can't part with them. They're all I have left of my father. What if, Richard began, what if there was a way for you to keep seeing the works every day, while also keeping them safe and properly preserved? How? Richard took a deep breath before making the proposal that had just formed in his mind. I have an empty apartment in the city center. It's much bigger than a studio with climate control and a security system. You could live there, rent-free, and the works could be displayed in the living room. Once a month, art students could visit to learn about Andrew Williams directly from his daughter. The silence that followed Richard's offer was heavier than before. Hope looked at him with an expression mixing surprise, suspicion, and something that might have been hope. Why would you do that? She asked for the second time that night. Because... Richard struggled again for the right words. Because today, you taught me that there are things in this world infinitely more valuable than money, and I want to learn how to be a better person. You think giving me things will make you feel better about yourself? Hope's question was direct and painful. Richard realized she had cut straight to the heart of his motivations. Maybe, he admitted. But does it matter if the result is genuinely good for you and your father's works? Hope thought for a long moment. Can I see the apartment before deciding? Of course, whenever you'd like. Tomorrow morning, she said decisively. And I want to take Melissa with me if she agrees. I need another woman's opinion on this. Melissa smiled for the first time that night. It would be an honor, Mrs. Williams. Dr. Harold, who had observed the entire conversation in respectful silence, stepped forward again. Mrs. Williams, if I may, I'd like to suggest something as well. Yes, Doctor? The Museum of Contemporary Art is planning a major exhibition on Andrew Williams next year. It would be wonderful if you could participate as a consultant. Your memories and stories about your father would be invaluable in contextualizing the works. Hope looked around the room. Some people had left during the conversation, but many remained, captivated by the story unfolding before them. I accept, she said finally. I accept the apartment offer. I accept being part of the exhibition. I accept the painting staying in the museum. But I have one last condition. What? Richard and Melissa asked almost in unison. I want part of what happened here tonight included in the museum exhibition, not to humiliate anyone, but to show how art can transform people and situations. Richard swallowed hard. You want me to be part of the exhibition too? If you're willing, sir. I think your transformation could inspire other wealthy people to rethink their values. I accept, said Richard after a pause, but only if you help me truly understand your father's work. I don't want to sound like a fool talking about something I don't comprehend. Hope smiled genuinely for the first time that evening. It will be my pleasure to teach you about art, Mr. Coleman, but know this, it will be a long and sometimes painful process. True art demands that we look within ourselves, and we don't always like what we find there. I'm prepared, said Richard, with more conviction than he felt. Melissa hugged her father for the first time in months. I'm proud of you, Dad. Why? I behaved terribly today. But you're trying to make it right, and you're doing it the right way, with humility. Dr. Harold clapped softly. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I believe this has been the most extraordinary evening I've ever witnessed at an auction. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'll arrange all the necessary paperwork to formalize the agreements made here." As people began to disperse, Hope prepared to leave. She walked over to where the painting was displayed and gazed at it for a few minutes. "Dad," she murmured so quietly that only Melissa, standing beside her, could hear. "You'd be proud to know your art is still changing lives." "Mrs. Williams," Melissa said gently, "how can you forgive so easily? My father was awful to you." "My dear," Hope replied wisely, "forgiving isn't forgetting what happened. It's choosing not to let bitterness destroy your heart. Your father hurt me today, but he also gave me the chance to honor my father's memory in a way I never thought possible. You're a very strong woman." "No, dear, I'm a very tired woman who's learned that anger only brings more suffering. I'd rather use my energy to create good things." Richard approached them, carrying some papers Dr. Harold had given him. "Mrs. Williams, here are the initial documents. The doctor will prepare everything, so the painting is transferred to the museum under the conditions we agreed on." "Thank you, Mr. Coleman. May I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "How do you make ends meet? Financially, I mean." Hope smiled. "I teach art to children at a community school in Queens. I don't earn much, but it's enough for my basic needs, and it brings me great joy to see the little ones discover the magic of colors and shapes." "Would you like to keep teaching even after moving into the new apartment?" "Very much. It's my life's purpose. Then I'll arrange transportation for you to and from the school every day. And if you ever need materials for the classes—" "Mr. Coleman," Hope interrupted gently, "you don't have to solve all my problems to feel forgiven. Sometimes the best way to help is simply to be present and be a better person." "What do you mean? Do you really want to help me? Then visit the school from time to time, talk to the children, show them that successful people can also be humble and kind. Be a positive example." Richard was surprised by the suggestion. "You think I'd be welcome at a community school?" "Everyone is welcome when they come with an open heart to learn and help." Melissa held her father's arm. "I'd like to come too, Mrs. Williams. I studied art in college, but never had the chance to work with children." "You'll both be very welcome. The children will love meeting you." When they finally left the auction, the rain had stopped and stars were beginning to peek through the clouds. Hope walked slowly along the sidewalk, followed by Richard and Melissa. "Mrs. Williams," said Richard, "can I give you a ride?" "Thank you, but I'd rather take the bus. I need some time to process everything that happened today." "Are you sure? It's late and—" "Mr. Coleman," she said with a smile, "I've been taking the night bus for 50 years. I know how to take care of myself. At least let me call you a cab." Hope thought for a moment. "All right, but only if you promise not to spend the rest of the night worrying about whether I got home safely." "How did you know I was going to do that?" "Because that's exactly what my father would have done. He was also the kind of person who felt responsible for everyone after realizing he'd made a mistake." Richard laughed, a genuine laugh, without any trace of the arrogance he'd shown earlier that evening. "You know me better than I know myself." "No, Mr. Coleman. I just know men who are trying to learn how to be better people." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now back to the story. While waiting for the cab to arrive, Melissa took the opportunity to talk more with Hope about art and life. She discovered that the older woman had been a university professor in the past, but had left her academic career to care for her father in his final years. "Don't you regret leaving the university?" Melissa asked. "Never," Hope replied without hesitation. "Those last years with my father were the most precious of my life. That's when I truly learned about art, through the eyes of someone who created it. And after he passed. Afterward, it was hard. I was lost for a while. But I found that teaching children gave me the same joy as caring for him did. It's a way to keep his passion for art alive." The cab arrived and Hope prepared to get in. Before she did, she turned to Richard and Melissa. "Thank you for tonight. You turned what could have been a terrible experience into something very special." "We're the ones who learned from you," Richard said. "See you tomorrow." "See you tomorrow. We'll meet at 10 in the morning at the building's entrance." After the cab drove off, Richard and Melissa stood on the sidewalk for a few minutes, absorbing everything that had happened. "Dad," Melissa finally said, "she's right about you changing tonight." "How so?" "The father I knew would never have admitted he was wrong. He would never have apologized publicly, and he certainly wouldn't have offered genuine help to someone." Richard thought about his daughter's words. "I think seeing my own arrogance reflected in that woman's eyes made me realize how unpleasant I'd become. And now I'll try to be different. I don't know if I'll succeed, but I'll try. I'll help you, Dad. I've always wanted a better relationship with you, but I never knew how. Maybe starting by working together with the school kids is a good first step." The next morning, Richard arrived at the building an hour early. He was more nervous than he'd been in decades. Not the nervousness of business or money, but the nervousness of someone who knows they're about to make a decision that could change their life forever. When Hope arrived promptly at 10, she was accompanied by a younger woman Richard and Melissa didn't know. "Good morning," Hope said. "This is Kathy, my neighbor. She understands architecture and decor. I thought it best to bring a second technical opinion." "Of course," Richard said. "Welcome." The apartment was on the 20th floor of a modern building in the heart of New York City. When the elevator doors opened, revealing a spacious and well-lit area, Hope was speechless. "Mr. Richard," she finally said, "this apartment is far too magnificent for me." "There's no place too magnificent for the daughter of Andrew Williams," he replied. Kathy carefully examined the apartment's conditions: lighting, humidity, temperature, security. After half an hour of inspection, she turned to Hope. "It's perfect for preserving the artwork, even better than many museums I've seen." Hope walked slowly through the main room, imagining how it would look with her father's 2 paintings on the walls. "There's one condition I'd like to add," she said. "What is it?" Richard asked. "I'd like to teach here as well, once a week for more advanced students. That way my father's works would truly fulfill their purpose of educating and inspiring." "Excellent idea," Melissa said. "Can I help organize these classes?" "Of course, dear." Richard watched the interaction between Hope and Melissa with a strange feeling in his chest. It was something he hadn't felt in a long time, genuine pride for his daughter, not for her achievements or appearance, but for her kindness. "When would you like to move in?" he asked. "If it's not too much trouble, I'd like to bring the paintings tomorrow. I've been worried about them in the studio apartment ever since I found out they might be at risk." "No problem at all. I'll arrange for a specialized art transport company." "There's no need for such luxury." "Mrs. Williams," Richard interrupted, "now that I know the true value of these works, I won't allow them to face any unnecessary risks." Kathy stepped closer to Hope. "Mrs. Williams, may I suggest how to arrange the pieces in the room?" "Of course. The west wall has ideal lighting for the still life, and the north wall would be perfect for the self-portrait. That way, both are protected from direct sunlight, but still clearly visible to visitors." Hope smiled. "You really know your craft. I've worked in art conservation for 15 years. It's rare to see someone care for family pieces so well. My father always said art is meant to be shared, not hidden. I think he'd be happy knowing his final works are finally getting the care they deserve." Richard stepped back to let the women discuss the practical details of the move. As he watched Hope interact so naturally in the luxurious setting, he noticed something surprising. She didn't seem intimidated or dazzled by the apartment. She assessed it with practical eyes, like someone accustomed to refined environments. "Mrs. Williams," he said as she approached, "may I ask a personal question?" "Go ahead." "Have you always lived modestly?" Hope chuckled softly. "No, Mr. Richard. When I was young, our family was very well off. I grew up surrounded by art and culture, traveled to Europe several times. The simplicity of my life now was a conscious choice, not forced by circumstances." "A choice?" "Yes. After my father passed, and I saw how the obsession with money had torn our family apart, I decided I wanted to live more simply. I realized I need very little to be happy." "But isn't it contradictory to accept living in this apartment then?" "No, because I'm not accepting it for luxury or status. I'm accepting it because it's the best way to preserve my father's work. If there were a simpler option with the same conservation conditions, I'd choose that instead." Richard was struck by the clarity of Hope's principles. She had found a balance between her personal convictions and the practical needs of the situation. "Mrs. Williams," Melissa said, "could you tell us what it was like growing up surrounded by your father's art?" Hope sat in one of the armchairs in the room, her eyes taking on a nostalgic gleam. "It was magical and frightening at the same time. Magical because I watched the artworks come to life, saw my father wrestling with every brushstroke to capture exactly what he felt. Frightening because sometimes he'd become obsessed with a piece and forget to eat, to sleep, to live. Was he a difficult man? Not difficult, just intense. Everything for him was a matter of life or survival. When he painted, it was as if the whole world depended on that piece. When he sold one, it was like he was selling a piece of his soul." And did that affect the family? Deeply. "My mother suffered a lot from his mood swings. I learned early on that artistic talent isn't the same as emotional stability." Richard sat in a nearby armchair. "Is that why you chose a simpler life?" "Partly, but also because I saw how commercial pressure destroyed the purity of my father's art. In his later years, he painted more for sales than for what he truly wanted to express." "And that bothered you?" "Very much. In our last conversations, he always said he wanted to paint like he did when he was young, just for the love of art. The painting you bought yesterday was his attempt to do that." Melissa wiped away an escaped tear. "It must have been so hard to see your own father suffer like that." "It was, but it was also a great lesson about what really matters in life." "What lesson?" "That success without inner peace isn't success at all. It's just a well-decorated illusion." Richard felt as if Hope was speaking directly to his soul. He'd spent decades building a fortune and a reputation, but had never stopped to ask if it truly made him happy. "Mrs. Williams," he said, "how did you find peace after everything you went through?" "Through the children," she answered without hesitation. "When I started teaching art to the little ones, I realized I was giving back to the world the purity my father had lost. They don't paint to sell or impress anyone. They paint because they feel the urge to create beauty." "And is that enough for you?" "It's more than enough. It's abundance." Kathy approached the group. "Sorry to interrupt, but I've finished the apartment evaluation. I can send a detailed report with all the recommendations for preserving the artwork." "That would be great," said Richard. "I want to make sure everything is done the best way possible." "There's just one thing we need to decide," Kathy continued. "The security system. For pieces of this value, something more sophisticated is recommended." "What kind of system?" asked Hope. "Cameras, motion sensors, a direct link to a security company. Nothing too invasive but effective." Hope seemed uneasy with the idea. "I've never lived with that kind of setup. I don't think I'd feel at home." "Mrs. Williams," said Richard, "how about we install just the basics, enough to protect the artwork without turning the apartment into a fortress?" "Could you be more specific?" "Just sensors on the pieces and a discreet link to the building's front desk. If anyone touches the paintings without deactivating the system first, the front desk is alerted, simple as that." Hope thought for a moment. "I can live with that, as long as I have full control over when the system is active or not." "Of course." After 2 more hours discussing practical details, the group was ready to leave. Hope would move in the next day, and the apartment classes would begin the following week. As they said goodbye in the building's lobby, Richard gently held Hope's arm. "Mrs. Williams, may I ask one more question?" "Go ahead." "Do you truly forgive me for what happened yesterday?" Hope looked deep into his eyes before answering. "Mr. Richard, forgiveness isn't something you give once and it's settled. It's something you practice every day. I choose to forgive you today. Tomorrow I'll need to choose again, and so on. And what if one day you can't make that choice? Then we talk about it honestly, like civilized adults." Richard smiled. "You're wiser than many philosophers I've read." "I'm not wise, Mr. Coleman, just old and tired enough to know life's too short to waste on grudges." The following week, Hope's move was completed without complications. The two paintings by Andrew Williams were carefully installed in the apartment's living room, and the result was stunning. They seemed to have finally found the home they deserved. The first apartment class was scheduled for the following Thursday. Hope had invited 12 advanced art students of varying ages. Richard and Melissa attended as observers. "Good afternoon, everyone," Hope said once they'd settled in the room. "Today we'll discuss art as emotional expression, using my father's works as examples." For the next 2 hours, Richard watched fascinated as Hope shared stories about each painting's creation. She spoke not just of technique or composition, but the feelings and experiences behind every brushstroke. "This still life," she said, pointing to one work, "was painted on a day my father was particularly sad. He'd received harsh criticism from a major newspaper. Can you see the melancholy in his color choices?" A young student raised her hand. "How do you know he was sad that specific day?" "Because I was there when he painted it. He worked silently all morning, and I could feel his sadness filling the studio." "And that influenced the piece?" "Completely. True art is never just technique. It's always a conversation between the artist and their deepest feelings." Richard leaned toward Melissa and whispered, "She should write a book about all this. Why don't you suggest it? You think she'd agree?" Only one way to find out. After class ended and students left, Richard approached Hope. "Ms. Williams, may I suggest something?" "Of course." "You should write a book about your father's art, about his creative process, the stories behind each piece. It'd be an invaluable contribution to American art history." Hope seemed surprised. "A book? I've never considered that." "You have knowledge no researcher or critic possesses. You know these works inside out, literally." "But I'm not a writer." "You don't need to be," Melissa interjected. "I can help with the technical writing. You provide content, I'll help organize and structure it." Hope walked to her father's self-portrait and studied it for minutes. He'd be happy knowing he still inspires people decades after passing. "So you'll write the book?" "I will, on one condition. Name it. Part of the royalties must fund the community school's art program. I want my father's legacy to keep helping children discover art." Richard and Melissa smiled simultaneously. "Agreed," said Richard, "and if I may, I'd like to help publish it. I have publishing contacts." "Why would you do that?" "Because you taught me that using our resources to perpetuate good things is infinitely more rewarding than using them just for ourselves." 3 months later, the Andrew Williams exhibition opened at the Museum of Contemporary Art. The painting Richard had bought at the auction was prominently displayed, accompanied by a plaque that told the entire story of that transformative night. The exhibition drew crowds from the very first day. People came not just to see the artwork, but to learn about the redemption story that had allowed these pieces to come to light. Richard and Melissa attended the opening, accompanied by several children from the community school, where they now volunteered regularly. "Mrs. Hope," said one of the children, admiring the centerpiece painting, "your father was really talented." "Yes, he was, sweetheart, and so are you all. The difference is, you still have time to develop your talents with love and patience." "Do you think our paintings will ever be in a museum too?" "If you keep painting from the heart, I'm sure they will." Richard watched the conversation between Hope and the children with a sense of fulfillment he had never felt before. His business was still thriving, but now he had something far more valuable, a purpose beyond profit. "Dad," Melissa said, stepping closer to him, "how does it feel to be part of a story like this?" "I feel small and big at the same time." "How so?" "Small because I realize how little I knew about what truly matters in life. Big because now I'm part of something greater than myself." "You've changed our family forever," Melissa said, turning to Hope. "No, dear. You changed yourselves? I just showed you a door. You chose to walk through it." Dr. Harold, who had also attended the opening, approached the group. "Mrs. Hope, I have news for you." "Good or bad?" "Very good. The book you're writing has caught the attention of several international universities. They want to invite you to speak about art and family memory." Hope seemed startled by the possibility. "I don't know if I'm ready for something so big." "Mrs. Hope," Richard said. "You've spent your whole life preparing for this, you just didn't know it." "How so?" "Every class you taught, every child you inspired, every moment you spent preserving your father's memory, all of it prepared you to share that wisdom with the world. But what if I fail? What if I say something foolish?" "Then you do," Melissa replied with a smile. "And you learn from it and keep trying. That's how it works." Hope laughed. "You're right. My father always said fear of failure only stops us from discovering what we're capable of." "So you'll accept the invitations?" "I will, but only if you promise to come with me to some of them. I'll need moral support." "It would be an honor," Richard said. 6 months after the auction night, Hope delivered her first international lecture on art, memory, and social transformation at Columbia University to an audience of 500. Richard and Melissa sat in the front row, joined by a delegation of 20 children from the community school who had won a special trip to attend. "When I was young," Hope began at the microphone, "I thought art was about individual talent and recognition. Now I know it's about human connection and collective transformation." She recounted the story of the auction night, the initial humiliation, the revelations that followed, and the journey of growth they had all shared. "Mr. Richard taught me it's never too late to change. I taught him that true change requires humility. Together, we learned that art has the power to transform not just its creator, but also those who behold it and preserve it." When she finished, the applause lasted a full 5 minutes. People of all ages stood up to applaud not just her words, but the extraordinary journey that had led this simple woman to become a respected voice in the academic world. After the lecture, during the Q&A session, a young student raised her hand. "Ms. Hope, what's the most important advice you'd give to someone who wants to turn a bad experience into something positive?" Hope thought for a moment before answering. "Don't try to erase the bad experience. Instead, use it as fertilizer to grow something better. Suffering can be an excellent teacher if we're willing to learn from it." And how do we know if we're learning or just suffering? When we start feeling compassion for others going through the same pain we endured, when our suffering makes us more human, not more bitter. Richard discreetly wiped away a tear. Those words perfectly summed up the journey he'd been on these past few months. After the lecture, the group went to dinner at a restaurant near the university. The school children were thrilled to see their teacher applauded by so many important people. "Miss Hope," said one of the girls, "are you famous now?" "No, sweetheart, I just have an interesting story to tell." But everyone was clapping. They were clapping for the story, not the person telling it. The difference matters. Richard leaned in to speak to the girl. "Do you know why Ms. Hope is still the same person even after all this success?" "Why?" "Because she learned that what we do is more important than how we're recognized for doing it." "I don't get it." Melissa joined the conversation. "It means that if you do something good to help others, that's more important than whether people praise you for it." "Oh, I get it. Like when I help my mom at home but no one sees." "Exactly," said Hope. "The most important things we do in life are usually invisible." During dinner, Richard got a call from Dr. Harold with unexpected news. "Mr. Richard, sorry to bother you during dinner, but I just received an offer I thought you should know about right away." "What kind of offer?" "A private collector is offering $5 million for the painting you bought at the auction." Richard looked at Hope, who had overheard the conversation. "What do you think of this offer, Doctor?" "It's an extraordinary amount, far above market value." "Ms. Hope," said Richard, "the decision is yours. The painting is in the museum under your name." Hope didn't hesitate for a second. "It's not for sale." "Are you sure? $5 million is a lot of money." "Mr. Richard, there are things in this world that are priceless. That painting is one of them. It's worth infinitely more where it is now, admired by thousands of people every month, than it would be on some millionaire's living room wall. But the money could help so many people." "It could. But the painting, where it is, also helps people, just in a different way. It inspires, educates, moves them. That's priceless." Dr. Harold laughed on the other end. "I figured that'd be your answer." I'll let the interested party know the piece isn't available. After dinner, as they walked back to the parking lot, one of the children asked a question that caught everyone off guard. "Miss Hope, was Mr. Richard a bad person before he met you?" Richard was embarrassed, but Hope answered naturally. "No, sweetheart, he was never a bad person. He was just someone who'd forgotten how to be good." "What's the difference?" "Bad people do bad things because they want to hurt others. People who have forgotten how to be good do bad things because they're lost and don't know what would truly make them happy." "And how does someone remember how to be good?" "By spending time with good people," Melissa replied. "Like you and like Mrs. Hope. Are we good people?" "You're the best people I know," Richard said with absolute sincerity. "You've taught me more about kindness in 6 months than I learned in 50 years. On the way back home, Richard drove in contemplative silence. Melissa sat in the front seat and Hope in the back. "Mrs. Hope," Melissa said, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Do you ever regret forgiving my father so easily?" "Never." "But it wasn't easy. It was quick. Those are different things." "How so?" "Forgiving quickly was a conscious decision I made so bitterness wouldn't poison my heart. But the process of truly forgiving has been a daily journey ever since." "And how is that journey going?" "It gets easier every day because every day your father gives me new reasons to believe his change is real." Richard stopped the car at a red light and turned to look at Hope. "How do you always know exactly what to say?" "I don't. I just speak honestly about what I feel." "That's harder than it seems." "At first, yes. But then it becomes a habit. And you realize the truth is far simpler and more freeing than any lie or half-truth." When they arrived at Hope's building, she prepared to step out but turned to say goodbye first. "Thank you for another wonderful day. You've changed my life in ways I never thought possible." "Did we change it?" Richard asked. "Or did you change us?" "I think we changed each other, and that's the magic of genuine human connections." "Mrs. Hope," Melissa said, "do you want us to walk you to your apartment?" "No need, dear, but thank you for caring." "See you tomorrow at school." "See you tomorrow. And don't forget, we're starting the mural project with the kids. It'll be special." After Hope disappeared into the building, Richard and Melissa stayed in the car for a few minutes. "Dad," Melissa said, "how do you feel now compared to 6 months ago?" Richard thought carefully before answering. 6 months ago, I was a rich man who thought money equaled worth. Today, I'm a rich man who's learned that real value has nothing to do with money." Is that good or bad? It's terrifying and freeing at the same time. Terrifying because I wasted so much of my life chasing empty things. Freeing because now I know how to find what truly fulfills me. Like working at the school? Like the school? Like our improved relationship? Like my friendship with Mrs. Hope? Like feeling part of something bigger and more important than myself? Do you think you'll keep this perspective? I don't know. I hope so. But I know if I start losing my way again, you'll help me find it back. Always, Dad. Always. A year after the auction night, Hope was finishing her book about Andrew Williams. It had grown far beyond a simple artistic biography. It was now a deep reflection on art, family, loss, and redemption. Richard sat in the living room, reading the latest chapter she'd written, while she prepared tea in the kitchen. "Mrs. Hope," he said when she returned with the cups, "this last chapter is extraordinary." "You think so?" "I was unsure about including so much of our personal story." "You have to include it. It's the most important part of the book." "Why?" "Because it shows that art isn't just about what happened in the past. It's about what keeps happening in the present. Your father died decades ago, but his art is still transforming lives today." Hope sat in her favorite armchair, where she could see both of her father's paintings at the same time. "Sometimes I talk to them," she confessed. "To the paintings?" "Yes. I tell my father about the people you've all become, about the school children, about how his art keeps spreading kindness in the world. And what do you think he would say about all this? I think he'd be surprised and very happy. Why? Because when he painted these works, he was in one of the darkest moments of his life. He never imagined they'd one day be at the center of a story of hope and transformation. Melissa arrived at the apartment carrying a folder full of drawings. "Good afternoon. I brought the children's latest creations to show you." She spread the drawings on the coffee table. They were colorful, vibrant depictions of different themes, but all showed a clear influence of Andrew Williams' style. "Look at this one," said Melissa, holding up a drawing by an 8-year-old girl. "She painted the community school in your father's style, Mrs. Williams." Hope took the drawing carefully and examined it closely. She perfectly understood how to use color to convey emotion. "My father would be proud." "And this one," Melissa continued, "was done by Johnny, that shy boy. It's a self-portrait, but in the background he included one of your father's landscapes." Richard watched the drawings with fascination. It's amazing how the children absorb these influences and create something completely new and personal. "That's exactly how art works," Hope explained. "Each generation receives the legacy of the one before and adds its own contribution. It's a continuous process of growth and renewal." "Mrs. Williams," said Melissa, "can I suggest something?" "Of course." "How about we organize a small exhibition with the children's work, right here in the apartment? We could invite the families and some art students." "Wonderful idea. It would be a beautiful way to show how my father's art keeps inspiring new generations." Richard stood up excitedly. "Can I help organize it? I have experience with events." "Absolutely. But remember, it has to be simple and welcoming, not some fancy social gathering." "Understood. Something that honors the children and the art, not the organizer." Hope smiled. "You've really changed, Mr. Coleman." "I have, Mrs. Williams, and I keep changing every day." The children's art exhibition was held 3 weeks later. The apartment was decorated with the young artist's creations, creating a beautiful contrast between Andrew Williams's mature works and the youthful, hopeful energy of the new talents. About 40 people attended: the children's families, some college students, Dr. Harold, Kathy, and several other friends Hope had made over the past year. "Good afternoon, everyone," Hope said, opening the event. "Today we're here to celebrate something very special, the continuity of art across generations." She pointed to her father's paintings on the walls. "These works were created by a man who believed art is a universal language of love and beauty. Today, decades later, you'll see how that language remains alive and vibrant through the eyes and hands of our children." One by one, the children presented their work. Each presentation was met with warm, genuine applause. Richard watched the humble families interacting in his old bachelor apartment and realized the space had never been used so meaningfully before. When it was Johnny's turn, the shy boy who had made the self-portrait, he could barely speak from nervousness. "Go on, Johnny," encouraged Hope. "Tell everyone about your painting." I painted myself," the boy stammered. "But in the background I put a piece of your father's painting because when I look at it I feel less alone." The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Johnny's mother had tears in her eyes, and several others were visibly moved. "Johnny," Hope said softly, "that's exactly why my father painted, so people like you would feel less alone." "Really? Really? He always said art is a hug we give the world." After all the children presented their work, Dr. Harold asked to speak. "I'd like to make a special announcement. The museum has decided to create a permanent wing dedicated to the work of young artists inspired by Andrew Williams. The pieces we saw today will be the first in this new collection." The children erupted in cheers. Their work was going to be in a real museum alongside the works of a famous artist. "But there's one condition," Dr. Harold continued, smiling. "You have to keep painting and creating. Art must keep growing." "We promise," the children shouted in unison. Once the guests had left and the apartment returned to normal, Richard, Melissa, and Hope sat down for one last conversation of the day. "How do you feel, Mrs. Williams?" Melissa asked. "Complete," she replied without hesitation. "Today I saw my father's dream come true in a way he never imagined. What was his dream? That his art would touch lives and inspire others to create beautiful things. Today that happened literally. Richard was looking at the paintings on the wall with a thoughtful expression. "Mrs. Williams, can I make a confession?" "Of course." "When I bought that painting at the auction, it was out of anger and pride. Today, I understand it was one of the best things I've ever done, even if it was for the wrong reasons." "Why was it one of the best things?" "Because it brought me here, to you, to a life with real meaning." "Do you think it was a coincidence?" "I don't know. Maybe some things are meant to happen, no matter our initial motives." Hope smiled mysteriously. "Can I tell you a secret?" "Go ahead." "I didn't go to the auction by chance that night." "What do you mean?" "I knew the painting would be there through Dr. Harold, and I knew you'd likely be there too." Richard was confused. "You knew me before that night?" "Not personally, but I knew who you were." "How?" "For years, I'd read about your business dealings in the papers, and a few months ago I saw a TV interview where you talked about art as an investment. The way you spoke bothered me deeply." "You went to the auction to confront me?" "Not exactly. I went to see my father's painting one last time, but when I saw you there and how you were behaving, I decided to teach you a lesson." Melissa covered her mouth in surprise. "Mrs. Williams, you planned all this?" "Not all of it. I couldn't predict how things would unfold, but I knew someone had to show Mr. Coleman that art is so much more than money." Richard was stunned. "You manipulated me?" "I created an opportunity for you to show who you really were. The choice of how to react was always yours." "What if I had reacted even worse?" "Then I would have left and gone on with my life as before. But I had hope that deep down you were a better person than you seemed." "Why did you have that hope?" "Because no one who genuinely cares about art can be a completely bad person. He may be confused, lost, arrogant, but not entirely bad." Richard remained silent for a few minutes, processing the revelation. "Aren't you angry that I found out about this?" Hope finally asked. "No," Richard said slowly. "Actually, I'm impressed. You had the courage to risk so much to try to save someone you didn't even know." "I wasn't trying to save you, Mr. Richard. I was trying to save my father's art from people who don't truly understand it." "And you accomplished both." "We accomplished both, because you chose to be saved." Melissa hugged Hope. "You're an extraordinary woman. Thank you for saving my family." "My dear, I didn't save your family. You saved yourselves. I just showed you it was possible." 2 years after the auction night, Hope's book about Andrew Williams was published and became a national bestseller. The story of Richard's transformation also gained prominence, inspiring many others to rethink their relationships with money and success. Richard had significantly expanded his philanthropic work, creating a foundation dedicated to art programs for underprivileged children. Melissa had left her job in the private sector to work full-time at the foundation. The community school where it all began now had a new wing dedicated to the arts, funded by Richard's foundation, but entirely run by Hope and her team of educators. At the opening of the new space, Hope was invited to give the keynote speech. 2 years ago, she began before an audience of 500, I met a man who believed money was the measure of all things. Today, that same man has discovered something far more valuable: the ability to turn resources into opportunities for others. She pointed to Richard, who sat in the front row with Melissa and a delegation of 20 children who had participated in the Foundation's first programs. Mr. Richard taught me that real change is possible at any age. I taught him that real change only happens when we choose to use our gifts to lift others up, not just ourselves. The audience applauded warmly. But the most important lesson I learned on this journey came from the children, Hope continued. They showed me that art isn't about being perfect or famous. It's about being honest and generous with our feelings and talents. When the speech ended, the school children presented a special performance, a collective painting created live, while singing a song they had composed about colors and dreams. Richard watched with tears in his eyes. 2 years earlier, He never would have imagined feeling such joy watching children paint. "Mr. Richard," one of the girls said after the performance, "do you want to paint with us?" "I don't know how to paint," he replied. "Miss Hope says everyone can paint. Some people just forget how." Richard looked at Hope, who smiled and handed him a brush. "She's right," Hope said. "Everyone is born knowing how to play with colors. Some just forget along the way." Richard hesitantly took the brush and made a yellow stroke on the collective canvas. "Like this?" he asked, like a child learning something new. "Perfect," the girl cheered. "Now do more." For half an hour, Richard painted with the children, unconcerned with technique or outcome, just feeling the pure joy of creating something with his own hands. "How do you feel?" Melissa asked when they stopped for a snack. "Like I've just discovered a part of myself that's been missing for decades," Richard replied. "And how does that feel?" "Liberating, like I'm allowed to be imperfect and still valuable." Hope approached them carrying a small canvas. "Mr. Richard, may I give this to you?" It was a small painting she had made during the children's performance. It showed a man in a suit holding a paintbrush, surrounded by tiny, colorful hands. "You painted this just now?" "Yes. I wanted to capture the moment you reconnected with your inner child." Richard studied the painting with admiration. "It's beautiful, but I can't accept it. You should sell it or donate it to a museum." "Mr. Richard," Hope said firmly, "this painting was made for you. It's a gift from one friend to another." "A friend?" "Yes. After everything we've been through together, that's how I see our relationship. A true friendship born from the most unlikely circumstances." Richard was moved. "I also consider you a dear friend, Ms. Hope. In fact, you're one of the most important people I've ever met." "Why?" "Because you taught me it's never too late to become the person we always had the potential to be." Melissa hugged them both. "You know this whole story feels like something out of a movie, right? The difference," Hope said, "is that movies have endings. Real life has continuations." "What do you mean?" "Our story didn't end today. It will continue tomorrow, the day after, and for years to come. Every child who discovers their passion for art, every person who chooses generosity over selfishness, every act of kindness we inspire in others. All of that is part of our ongoing story." Richard nodded. "And the most beautiful part is we don't know how it will end." "Who says it has to end?" Hope asked with a smile. "The best stories are those that keep multiplying through other people." 3 years after the auction night, Hope was giving her final official lecture before retiring from public life. At 75, she had decided to dedicate herself exclusively to working directly with children. The lecture took place in the same hall where it had all begun, now transformed into a cultural center run by Richard's Foundation. "When I first entered this hall 3 years ago," she said, "I was prepared to say goodbye to my father's last important work. Today I leave knowing his legacy will continue to live on and inspire people for generations." Richard was in the audience, accompanied by Melissa and her husband, she had married the previous year, and a delegation of 50 children now enrolled in the Foundation's programs. "The most important lesson I've learned these 3 years is that real change only happens when it becomes a collective process. One person changing isn't enough. We must create a network of change that sustains and expands itself." She pointed to the children in the crowd. "These children aren't just art students. They're agents of transformation who will carry this positive energy to their families, their communities, their future careers. They're living proof that investing in art is investing in humanity's future." After the lecture, there was a special ceremony. Dr. Harold announced that the hall where it all began would officially be renamed the Hope Williams Cultural Center. "It's a fitting tribute," he said, "to a woman who turned a place of humiliation into a center of hope and growth." Hope was visibly moved by the honor. "I accept this not in my name, but in the name of all who believe art can change the world." After the ceremony, Richard, Melissa, and Hope walked through the city, discussing future plans. "Ms. Hope," Melissa said, "do you have any regrets about these 3 years?" "Just one," Hope replied. "What?" "That it didn't happen sooner. Imagine how many other people could have been touched if our journey had started 10 or 20 years ago. But maybe we needed to be ready, suggested Richard. Maybe everything happened at the right time. Could be. Or maybe life is just like this, a series of encounters that can change everything if we're open to them. And now? Asked Melissa. What are your plans, ma'am? To keep doing what I've always done, teaching children to discover the magic of colors and shapes, only now with better resources and more support. Anything else? Yes, finishing a new book. About what? About how small acts of courage can lead to big transformations, using our story as the main example. Richard smiled. Are you going to tell the truth about how you planned that night at the auction? I'll tell everything, including your early attempts to buy my forgiveness with money. That's embarrassing. It's honest, and honesty is the foundation of any real transformation. When they arrived at the building where Hope lived, she turned to say goodbye. Thank you for another perfect day. You two remain the greatest blessings of my life. The feeling is mutual, said Richard. You literally saved my soul. No, Mr. Richard. I just showed you that your soul was there all along, waiting to be rediscovered. And now? Will we keep seeing each other regularly? Of course. You're part of my family now. Families don't abandon each other. Even when I go back to being annoying and arrogant sometimes. Especially when you go back to being annoying and arrogant. That's when we need people who love us enough to set us back on the right path. Melissa hugged Hope. You know you changed our lives forever, right? And you changed mine. That's the beauty of true human connections. Everyone comes out transformed. End of story. Now, tell me what you thought of this story of transformation and where you're watching from. If you have something to share with us, leave your heartfelt words in the comments. Do you think Hope made the right choice by forgiving Richard so quickly? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories.